Neuroscientists at Stanford discovered something terrifying about your decision-making. Your amygdala activates 80 milliseconds before your rational cortex when facing anything your brain flags as important. Imagine checking your bank balance and seeing a sudden drop. That instant stomach drop feeling? That's this ancient system kicking in, flooding your system with chemicals that override logical thinking. This evolutionary survival mechanism that once protected our ancestors is sabotaging your modern life. In the next 12 minutes, I'll walk you through how this brain hijacking happens, reveal examples of its impact on real people, and equip you with 3 research-backed techniques to regain control of your decisions. Your brain's hidden saboteur. Have you ever made a terrible decision that you knew was wrong even as you were making it? You're not alone. That voice in your head saying, "Don't do it," while your body moves forward anyway, is evidence of a fundamental conflict happening inside your brain. Your mind might actually be working against you. Your brain isn't the unified thinking machine most of us imagine. It's more like a computer running 2 different operating systems simultaneously, one ancient and one modern that often compete for control. The first is your emotional brain, primitive, powerful, and lightning fast. The second is your rational brain, thoughtful, analytical, and comparatively slow. These systems are separate physical structures that developed at different points in our evolutionary history. The emotional brain centered in regions like the amygdala and limbic system evolved first. It served as the original operating system that kept early humans alive in dangerous environments, making rapid judgments about threats and opportunities without waiting for conscious thought. Your rational brain, primarily housed in the prefrontal cortex, emerged later as an evolutionary upgrade, enabling complex reasoning, planning, and impulse control. What's fascinating is that the emotional brain maintains priority access to your decision-making process. Despite our technological and social advancement, we're still running on ancient hardware that gives emotional reactions first influence over our choices. The timing gap between these systems is substantial. When you encounter a potential situation, your emotional brain processes the information in mere milliseconds, as little as 12 milliseconds for initial threat detection. Your amygdala triggers a full emotional response in under 50 milliseconds. Meanwhile, your rational conscious thought processes require at least 350 to 500 milliseconds to begin engaging with the same information, nearly half a second delay. This speed difference creates what neuroscientists call a first mover advantage for emotions. By the time your rational mind receives the information needed to make a decision, your emotional brain has already detected the situation, categorized it, triggered hormonal responses, and influenced how your conscious mind will perceive the information. Think of it like a horse and rider. Your emotions are the powerful horse driven by instinct. Your rational mind is the rider, technically in control, but always slightly behind the horse's reactions. When something startles the horse, it starts running before the rider can grab the reins. By the time you're consciously aware of what's happening, the horse has already chosen a direction. The amygdala sits at the center of this system as your brain's emotional command center. This almond-shaped structure deep within the temporal lobe evolved specifically to detect threats and opportunities quickly. It acts as a neural early warning system, scanning all incoming sensory information for anything requiring immediate action. When it detects something significant, it immediately triggers emotional responses and prepares your body for action. What makes this system particularly interesting is that it operates largely beneath conscious awareness. Your amygdala forms connections with virtually every other important brain region, allowing it to influence everything from vision to memory to decision-making without you realizing it's happening. It can literally change what you see, what you remember, and what options seem available to you, all before you've had a conscious thought. In modern life, this evolutionary adaptation affects our decisions in unexpected ways. The same circuitry that helped early humans avoid predators now activates when we receive a critical email. The neural pathways that once helped judge whether a stranger was friend or foe now influence whether we swipe right or left on dating apps. The threat detection systems that once identified poisonous berries now shape our reaction to stock market fluctuations. This explains why we make impulsive purchases despite budgeting carefully. It explains why we send texts we immediately regret. It explains why smart people repeatedly choose romantic, partners who are wrong for them, and why investors panic sell at market bottoms and buy at market tops. The key insight: your emotional brain makes decisions approximately 80 milliseconds before your rational mind even knows what's happening. That tiny timing difference, less than the blink of an eye, shapes the course of your life through thousands of small choices that accumulate over time. When you're deciding whether to eat the cookie, ask for the raise, confront your partner, or check your phone, your emotional brain gets the first vote. And since it evolved when quick reactions were more important than perfect accuracy, it often chooses based on immediate comfort rather than long-term outcomes. A truly fascinating part? Your rational brain then creates logical-sounding explanations for decisions that were actually driven by emotions. Scientists call this confabulation, the creation of reasonable-sounding justifications for behaviors triggered by unconscious processes. This system didn't evolve to sabotage us. It developed to keep us alive in environments very different from today's world. Your emotional reactions might seem irrational now, but they're the product of a brain system that successfully protected your ancestors through countless generations of survival challenges. To understand why our brains work this way, we need to look at the evolutionary pressure that shaped this peculiar decision-making structure and how this ancient adaptation now creates problems in our modern environment. Evolution's double-edged sword. What if I told you the same brain feature that kept your ancestors alive is now ruining your life? The rapid emotional responses that once helped humans survive in dangerous environments now trigger for emails, traffic jams, and awkward social situations. This mismatch between our ancient brains and modern world explains why we keep making decisions we later regret. For over 99% of human evolutionary history, our ancestors lived in environments filled with immediate physical dangers. They faced predators, rival tribes, poisonous plants, and natural disasters that could end their lives in minutes. In these high-stakes settings, waiting to think through every decision was inefficient and potentially fatal. The humans who survived are those whose brains could detect and respond to threats in milliseconds. Consider an early human gathering berries at the forest edge. A rustling sound emerges from nearby bushes. Those who immediately jumped back in fear survived when that rustling was a predator. Those who paused to think, even briefly, were removed from the gene pool. The selection pressure produced brains wired for rapid emotional responses that bypass conscious thought. Our brains evolved to prioritize emotional reactions over rational analysis because in environments where threats could kill you before conscious processing, emotion served as life-saving shortcuts. Fear, disgust, anger, and desire provided immediate behavioral responses when deliberation would take too long. Your emotional brain is pre-rational, designed to act before thinking. Today, we're rarely in life or death situations, yet our brains still react as if we do. Imagine missing your bus to an important meeting. Your heart races, palms sweat, and stress hormones flood your system, the same physiological response your ancestors experienced when facing a predator. You might snap at the next person who speaks to you or make hasty decisions about how to proceed with your day, all because your brain is processing a minor inconvenience as a survival threat. Why do we react so strongly to non-threatening situations? Our visual system contains specialized circuits that process potential dangers with extraordinary speed. Research shows people detect snake-like shapes faster than flowers, even when partially hidden. This happens across cultures and in people who've never seen real snakes. This same system activates when you see a garden hose in your peripheral vision, triggering momentary fear before your conscious mind catches up. This evolutionary hangover affects countless modern decisions. When a driver cuts you off, your brain processes this as a social threat similar to a rival entering tribal territory. Your amygdala activates, triggering anger and aggressive impulses designed to defend your status. You might honk or gesture, responses that increase accident risk, because your brain is running ancient social threat programming. Social threats now trigger the same neurobiological responses as physical dangers did for our ancestors. Neuroscience research confirms that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Being criticized in a meeting triggers stress responses identical to those that once helped your ancestors escape predators. Your brain cannot distinguish between a lion chasing you and your boss sending a critical email. These primitive survival circuits activate constantly in modern life. Checking your bank account and seeing a lower balance activates your threat detection system as if your food supply is running low. When deadlines approach, your body prepares for battle or escape, though neither helps complete the project. Scrolling through social media and seeing other success triggers stress responses that once helped maintain tribal standing. Financial decisions highlight this mismatch perfectly. Our ancestors hoarded resources for immediate use in their environment. Today's investing requires delaying gratification for decades, something our emotional brains struggle to process as beneficial. Market drops activate our threat detection systems as if our survival is at risk, driving panic selling at precisely the wrong moment. The stress response further illustrates this mismatch. For our ancestors, stress typically involved acute physical threats that resolved quickly. Their bodies mobilized energy through cortisol and adrenaline for immediate action, then returned to baseline. Modern stressors like mortgages and career uncertainty are chronic, low-grade threats without clear resolution. Our bodies remain in stress response for extended periods, never getting the physical release the system was designed for. These emotional shortcuts evolved as life-saving mechanisms that compress complex environmental information into simple commands: run, fight, approach, avoid. They worked brilliantly when dangers were immediate and physical. Today, these shortcuts activate for symbolic threats and complex social situations they weren't designed to handle. The system that helped avoid poisonous berries now makes you panic sell investments. The circuits that identified friendly tribe members lead you to trust people based on superficial similarities. The threat detection system that spotted predators keeps you awake worrying about performance reviews. These responses create a chemical storm throughout your body, altering everything from heart rate to muscle tension. Each emotion involves specific neurochemicals that evolved to help our ancestors survive, but now influence decisions in ways that often work against our modern goals and values. The chemical cocktail controlling your choices. Every decision you make is influenced by an invisible chemical cocktail flooding your brain, and you never even notice it happening. These chemicals work silently behind the scenes, shifting your preferences, altering your perception, and ultimately guiding your choices in ways your conscious mind rarely detects. Understanding this chemical influence gives you unprecedented insight into why you make the decisions you do. 3 main neurochemicals drive this hidden influence on your decisions: cortisol, dopamine, and oxytocin. Each evolved to help our ancestors survive specific challenges, but now they operate in environments they weren't designed for. These chemicals fundamentally change how you think and what options seem available to you. Imagine standing backstage before giving an important presentation. Your heart races, your mouth goes dry, and suddenly all you can think about is everything that could go wrong. That's cortisol at work, narrowing your focus to perceive threats while your rational planning abilities diminish. These chemicals operate beneath conscious awareness. You don't decide to release cortisol when stressed or dopamine when rewarded. These processes happen automatically, triggered by your brain's interpretation of events around you. By the time you're consciously weighing options, these chemicals have already primed your brain towards certain choices. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is released when your amygdala detects a potential threat. This served your ancestors well when facing physical dangers, but creates serious decision-making problems in modern life. Cortisol narrows your attention to focus exclusively on the threat, like a camera zooming in too far and losing the broader picture. This chemical change explains why you might snap at a loved one after a stressful day at work, or why financial decisions made during periods of anxiety often prioritize immediate relief over long-term benefits. The cortisol response creates what scientists call the tunnel vision effect, a narrowing of cognitive focus that helped our ancestors respond quickly to predators, but now creates significant problems for complex modern decisions. When cortisol floods your system, your brain literally loses access to its full range of options, focusing instead on the quickest path to safety. This explains why stressed investors often sell stocks at market bottoms, locking in losses at precisely the wrong time. Their cortisol-flooded brains aren't processing the historical evidence that markets recover. They're responding to an immediate threat signal by seeking safety at any cost. While cortisol pushes you away from perceived threats, dopamine pulls you toward rewards. This neurotransmitter creates the sensation of pleasure and drives you to repeat behaviors that triggered its release. Dopamine literally teaches your brain what to want. Each time dopamine releases in response to a stimulus, the neural pathways that led to that reward strengthen, creating anticipation and seeking the reward before you consciously decide to pursue it. The dopamine system evolved to motivate behaviors essential for survival, but now responds to artificial rewards that create addictive decision patterns. Your smartphone triggers dopamine releases similar to those from food or sex, training your brain to check it compulsively. This explains why you might open a social media app just for a minute and emerge an hour later. Your dopamine-driven reward system hijacked your decision through a series of small chemical rewards. The third major chemical influencer is oxytocin, the trust molecule. When you hug someone, share a meal, or feel connected to a group, your brain releases oxytocin, creating feelings of bonding and trust. This chemical evolved to strengthen tribal bonds essential for survival. Oxytocin makes us more trusting, even when trust isn't warranted. This helps explain why we're more likely to trust people who look like us, share our interests, or simply spend time with us regardless of their actual trustworthiness. In romantic relationships, physical touch and sexual activity create large oxytocin releases that promote bonding, explaining why people often trust new partners deeply before really knowing them. Their brains are bathed in a chemical designed to create attachment. What makes this chemical cocktail particularly powerful is how these three chemicals interact. Cortisol often suppresses oxytocin, explaining why chronic stress damages relationships. Dopamine and oxytocin can reinforce each other, creating powerful bonds to people or activities that provide both reward and connection. These chemicals evolved to help us survive, but now create problematic decision patterns in modern contexts. Cortisol pushes you towards safety, dopamine drives you toward pleasure regardless of consequences, and oxytocin makes you trust your social group. Understanding this chemical influence doesn't mean you're helpless against it. Knowledge of these processes creates the possibility of recognizing and countering their effects. But first, you need to understand just how quickly these chemicals can hijack your thinking. Your emotional brain has both a chemical advantage and a time advantage that gives it significant influence before your rational mind even enters the conversation. The 80-millisecond hijack. Did you know your emotional brain gets an 80-millisecond head start on every decision you make? That tiny gap changes everything. It's like giving one runner a head start in a race. Even if the second runner is faster, that initial advantage often determines who wins. This timing difference explains why you might know something is a bad idea even as you do it anyway. What neuroscientists call emotional hijacking focuses on which system processes information first. Your brain runs two parallel processing systems that work at different speeds, creating a timing gap that influences every decision you make. Research from NYU Center for Neuroscience revealed that your emotional brain centers begin responding to stimuli approximately 80 milliseconds before your rational conscious brain regions activate. In neuroprocessing terms, this brief moment is substantial. By the time your prefrontal cortex begins analyzing the situation, your amygdala and other emotional centers have already 1. Categorized the stimulus as positive or negative. 2. Triggered initial hormonal responses. 3. Begun priming certain behavioral responses. 4. Started filtering what information reaches consciousness. 5. Created an emotional context that colors how you perceive the situation. The precision of this timing difference comes from functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, studies that track blood flow in the brain during decision-making tasks. These studies map exactly when different brain regions activate in response to stimuli, consistently showing that emotional structures activate first, followed by regions involved in conscious reasoning. Your brain processes emotional information through what neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux calls the low road, a neural pathway that bypasses conscious thought entirely. When you encounter something potentially important, sensory information travels from your senses to the thalamus, then follows two simultaneous paths, the thorough but slower high road to the cortex for conscious analysis and the immediate low road directly to your amygdala for rapid emotional response. Think of your rational brain as someone arriving late to a party. By the time it shows up, the emotional brain has already arranged the furniture, chosen the music, and decided who's welcome. The rational brain can make changes, but it's working within an established framework. Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet's research dramatically illustrates this gap. When subjects were asked to flex their wrists whenever they chose, Libet detected brain activity in motor preparation areas about 350 milliseconds before subjects reported consciously deciding to move. More recent studies show brain activity predicting choices up to 10 seconds before conscious awareness. This explains common experiences like saying something hurtful in anger even as another part of your mind tells you to stop, or reaching for food you're trying to avoid while feeling like you're watching helplessly. When measuring brain activity viewing emotional images, researchers found the amygdala activates 80 to 120 milliseconds after seeing the image, while the prefrontal cortex doesn't begin until about 200 milliseconds after. Your emotional response is well underway before your rational mind starts processing. The timing gap becomes particularly problematic with complex modern decisions. When considering a job offer, your emotional brain might react to the interviewer's friendly demeanor before your rational brain analyzes whether the position aligns with your long-term goals. In financial decisions, your amygdala might detect a seemingly threatening pattern and trigger fear before your rational brain can analyze historical data, showing temporary market declines are normal. This timing difference explains cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding contradictory beliefs. When your emotional brain commits to an action that your rational brain later questions, you experience internal conflict, often resolved by creating rationalizations that justify the emotionally driven choice. What makes this process so effective is its invisibility. You don't experience your amygdala activating separately from your prefrontal cortex responding. Instead, you experience a single, unified decision process that feels entirely conscious and deliberate, even when significantly shaped by processes you never consciously registered. Understanding this timing gap doesn't mean your rational mind is helpless. The prefrontal cortex can override emotional responses if given enough time. Emotional regulation means creating space between stimulus and response for your rational brain to catch up, extending that gap from milliseconds to seconds. How does this split-second neural timing affect your daily work life? This hijacking happens in real workplaces with real consequences for your career. In the next section, we'll explore how this 80-millisecond gap manifests in professional settings, potentially your career promotions, projects, and opportunities. The promotion you missed, the project that failed, that job you quit. What if these weren't rational choices but emotional hijackings? Most of us assume our career decisions reflect careful analysis of options and outcomes. The evidence suggests otherwise. Your workplace might be the perfect environment for emotional hijacking because it combines high stakes with social pressure, a combination your ancient brain interprets as serious danger. Let's examine common workplace scenarios where emotional hijacking leads to poor decisions. Consider Sarah, a marketing director with 15 years of experience who damaged her reputation in seconds. During a team meeting, a younger colleague questioned her strategy in front of executives. Sarah felt a flash of anger and defensiveness before she consciously processed what happened. Rather than addressing the criticism professionally, she responded with a cutting remark that made her appear insecure and unprofessional to the leadership team. 6 months later, she was passed over for a promotion she had been working toward for years. Have you experienced something similar? Perhaps you felt that immediate surge of emotion in a workplace situation and later regretted your response. This happens because your amygdala detected a social threat and triggered an emotional response before your prefrontal cortex could engage. What makes workplace environments particularly prone to emotional hijacking? Research from organizational neuroscience provides fascinating insights. Workplace stress specifically triggers the amygdala's threat response system in ways that mirror physical danger. Your brain processes criticism from a boss, exclusion from an important meeting, or a challenging deadline as legitimate threats to your survival. Your brain literally categorizes these experiences as dangers requiring immediate response. A 2017 study using fMRI scans found that social rejection in workplace contexts activated the same neural pathways as physical pain. When participants were excluded from work-related group activities, their brains showed activation patterns nearly identical to those experienced during physical discomfort. This explains why workplace conflicts feel so threatening. Your brain processes them using the same circuits evolved for physical danger. The workplace combines several elements that make emotional hijacking especially likely. Performance anxiety. When presenting to executives or interviewing for a promotion, your brain activates the same circuits that will respond to physical threats. Your palms sweat, heart races, and thinking narrows responses designed for physical dangers, not for showcasing strategic thinking. Digital communication and emotional email sending anger can derail a career built over years. Digital communication lacks nonverbal cues that might soften messages, making emotional outbursts appear more intentional than they actually are. Public speaking fear. Approximately 73% of people report fear of public speaking, ranking it above fears of death, spiders, or heights. This fear makes sense evolutionarily. Standing alone before a group resembles ancient scenarios where social judgment could lead to exile. Deadline pressure. As pressure mounts to complete projects on time, cortisol and adrenaline flood your system. These stress hormones evolve for immediate physical threats, not careful analytical work. Research from Harvard Business School found that employees under deadline pressure made 68% more errors and were 41% less likely to identify important contextual information. The consequences extend beyond momentary discomfort. Research from the University of California found that cortisol from workplace stress can directly impair the prefrontal cortex's executive function by up to 80%. This significantly impairs your ability to think creatively or consider long-term consequences during periods of high stress. Brain imaging studies show that during acute work stress, blood flow shifts away from your prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and rational analysis, toward more primitive midbrain regions involved in emotional processing and automatic responses. This physical shift explains why stress professionals often make decisions they later struggle to justify. Different neural systems literally took control during those moments. The most successful professionals aren't necessarily those with the highest IQ or greatest technical skills. Often, they're those who have developed mechanisms to prevent emotional hijacking during key career moments. They've trained themselves to recognize the physical signs of an impending emotional response and created habits that give their rational brain time to catch up before making important decisions. This neurological understanding changes how we should approach professional development, rather than focusing exclusively on technical skills or industry. Knowledge career advancement might depend equally on developing the neural pathways that prevent emotional hijacking during crucial moments. The ability to maintain prefrontal cortex function during stress might be the most underrated professional skill. But work isn't the only place where emotions override logic. As damaging as emotional hijacking can be to your career, it may be even more influential in an area where the stakes feel even more personal. Our romantic relationships might be the perfect example of emotional hijacking in action, where chemistry quite literally overrides compatibility in ways that shape the course of our lives. The chemistry of bad relationships. Ever wonder why smart people keep choosing partners who are clearly wrong for them? The answer lies in a chemical hijacking most of us never see coming. Every day, intelligent, accomplished people enter relationships their friends and family can clearly see are doomed from the start. These aren't just bad decisions. They're the result of powerful neurochemicals temporarily overriding your brain's rational assessment systems. Romantic attraction functions as a highly structured neurochemical response that evolved for specific evolutionary purposes. When you feel that initial spark with someone, your brain floods with a potent cocktail of chemicals designed to bond you to another person before your rational mind can fully assess compatibility. This chemical hijacking operates beneath conscious awareness. You don't decide to feel attraction. It happens to you, often before you've gathered enough information to make an informed choice. Your brain chemistry effectively makes decisions for you, creating feelings powerful enough to override even the clearest warning signs. Dopamine and norepinephrine play the leading roles in this process. When you meet someone who triggers attraction, these chemicals create what scientists call the biochemical signature of attraction. Dopamine generates pleasure and reward feelings, while norepinephrine increases energy, focuses attention, and reduces appetite. Together, they create that excitement, butterflies, and intense focus on a new person. This chemical state closely resembles addiction. Brain scans of people in early-stage romantic attraction show activation patterns similar to those of individuals under cocaine's influence. Both states activate the brain's reward pathways, create intense cravings, and focus attention on obtaining the next hit. Syracuse University researchers found that people in early romance stages showed activity in the same dopamine-rich areas that respond to addictive substances. Take Maya, a successful attorney who recognized her pattern of choosing charismatic but emotionally unavailable partners. Despite her analytical skills in the courtroom, she found herself repeatedly drawn to men who created the same emotional roller coaster she'd experienced with her distant father. Only after understanding the chemical basis of her attractions could she begin making different choices. This chemical state creates what researchers call positive illusion, seeing a new romantic interest as better than they objectively are. Your brain processes information about a new romantic interest differently, emphasizing positive aspects while downplaying warning signs. The intense feelings of excitement become misinterpreted as evidence of compatibility, rather than what they actually are, a neurochemical process that evolved to promote reproduction regardless of long-term compatibility. Research shows our brains often specifically attract us to partners who trigger familiar emotional patterns, even unhealthy ones. If you grew up where love was inconsistent or conditional, your brain may have formed neural pathways that associate love with uncertainty or anxiety. Later, your brain responds to these familiar patterns, creating attraction to people who trigger the same emotional states. Dr. Helen Fisher, a biological anthropologist who has studied romantic love extensively, explains that early experiences with caregivers create templates in the brain for how relationships should feel. Your brain doesn't necessarily direct you toward healthy patterns. It directs you toward familiar ones. This explains why many people find themselves repeatedly drawn to partners who create the same problematic dynamics, despite conscious intentions to choose differently. In modern dating apps, this can be particularly destructive. The abundance of choices often leads people to follow these unconscious patterns repeatedly, mistaking chemical attraction for compatibility. After initial attraction, oxytocin enters the picture. Released during physical touch, sexual activity, and extended eye contact, this bonding hormone creates feelings of trust and attachment. While essential for forming lasting bonds, oxytocin cements attachment before compatibility is established. This explains why physical intimacy often creates emotional attachment even when rational assessment suggests the relationship isn't viable. The University of California demonstrated this effect by measuring oxytocin levels in couples. Those with higher oxytocin showed stronger attachment even when reporting lower relationship satisfaction. Their brains had essentially created a biochemical dependency that overrode their conscious assessment. The brain's reward system can become conditioned to seek drama rather than stability. Volatile relationships create intermittent dopamine spikes that can become more addictive than consistent positive experiences. This conditioning happens through intermittent reinforcement, the same principle making gambling addictive. When rewards come unpredictably, the brain releases more dopamine than when rewards are consistent. Understanding these mechanisms explains why we continue making the same relationship mistakes despite knowing better. The chemicals driving attraction operate much faster than rational assessment, creating feelings that feel like truth rather than temporary states. By the time your rational mind catches up, you're often already chemically bonded to an unsuitable partner. The solution isn't ignoring chemistry. These feelings serve important evolutionary purposes. Instead, understanding these chemical processes allows you to recognize when your assessment abilities are compromised. By creating space between attraction and commitment, you give your rational brain time to catch up to your neurochemistry, allowing for more balanced relationship decisions. These emotional hijackings don't just affect our hearts, they hit our wallets too. The same neurochemical processes that override rational thought in relationships also influence our financial decisions, creating predictable patterns of irrational behavior in markets and personal finance. Let's examine how emotions drive financial decisions in ways that often work against our best interests. The fear. The stock market crash of 2008 wasn't just an economic event. It was a mass emotional hijacking that cost people their life savings. Could you be next? Most people believe their financial decisions are based on careful analysis and rational thinking. The evidence tells a different story. Your financial choices might be the perfect example of emotional hijacking because money decisions combine two elements that trigger powerful brain responses, uncertainty, and the potential for both gain and loss. Have you ever felt your heart race during a market dip or experienced a rush of excitement when your investments surge? These reactions reveal how financial decisions become dominated by emotional patterns rather than rational analysis. Financial decisions are particularly vulnerable to emotional hijacking through predictable fear and greed cycles. When markets rise, dopamine increases in your brain, creating feelings of excitement and anticipation. When markets fall, cortisol floods your system, triggering fear responses identical to those your ancestors experienced when facing physical threats. These chemical changes happen automatically without your conscious awareness. Neuroscientists at Caltech used fMRI scanning to monitor brain activity during investment decisions and discovered something fascinating. As markets rise, reward regions activate strongly while rational assessment areas show decreased activity. During market declines, threat detection regions dominate brain function, suppressing the cognitive systems needed for careful analysis. This explains one of the most damaging financial behaviors, panic selling at market bottoms. When markets decline significantly, your amygdala processes this information as a legitimate survival threat. Your brain evolved in environments where resource loss could mean starvation. The amygdala triggers the same fear response to a temporary market decline as it would to a life-threatening resource shortage. This fear response creates what neurologists call loss aversion, the tendency to feel the pain of losses more intensely than the pleasure of equivalent gains. Research shows that losing money activates brain regions up to twice as strongly as gaining the same amount. This asymmetrical response explains why investors often sell after significant declines. The emotional pain becomes too intense, overwhelming rational knowledge about market cycles. On the opposite end, dopamine-driven greed creates buying frenzies during market bubbles. When asset prices rise rapidly, your brain's reward circuits activate, releasing dopamine that creates excitement and anticipation. This chemical state alters risk perception, making dangerous market conditions feel like opportunities. The faster prices rise, the more dopamine releases, driving increasingly irrational behavior. A Stanford University study monitored investors' brain activity during simulated market bubbles and found that as prices rose, activity increased in the nucleus accumbens central to reward processing, while decreasing in prefrontal cortex regions responsible for risk assessment. This explains why normally cautious investors often make their most aggressive purchases near market tops. What makes these cycles particularly damaging is how cortisol impairs rational decision-making during volatility. Chronic elevated cortisol physically impairs your prefrontal cortex, the brain region needed for long-term planning. Brain imaging studies show that after sustained market volatility, investors show reduced activity in regions associated with analysis and increased activity in emotional processing areas. The cryptocurrency market of 2017 to 2018 provides a clear example of these emotional cycles. When Bitcoin rose from $1,000 to nearly $20,000, brain scans of cryptocurrency investors showed activation patterns similar to gambling addiction. The volatile price movements created perfect conditions for dopamine-driven speculation rather than rational investment. When prices subsequently crashed by over 80%, panic selling dominated, driven by the same amygdala responses that would have helped ancestors flee from predators. Financial losses activate the same brain regions as physical pain. Neuroscientists at the National Institute of Mental Health discovered that financial loss activates the anterior insula, the same region that processes physical pain sensations. This explains why losing money can feel genuinely painful rather than merely disappointing. This pain response creates avoidance behaviors, making investors reluctant to even look at declined investments, preventing rational reassessment. This connection between financial loss and physical pain appears across cultures and income levels. The intensity of brain activation correlates directly with the amount of money lost, helping explain why financial decisions often seem emotionally charged in ways that other decisions are not. Your brain processes financial threats like physical dangers, making you sell when scared, usually at the bottom, and buy when excited, often at the top. This isn't a character flaw, it's the result of applying brain systems evolved for physical survival to abstract modern financial concepts. Understanding these mechanisms doesn't make you immune to them, but it creates the possibility of recognizing emotional hijacking while it's happening, rather than after the damage is done. By developing awareness of how these brain systems influence financial decisions, you can create structures that protect your long-term interests from short-term emotional responses. Now that we've seen the problem in action, how emotions hijack decisions in work, relationships, and finances, let's look at the science behind how we can take back control. Rewiring your brain's decision circuits. What if you could actually change the physical structure of your brain to make better decisions? Neuroscientists have discovered it's surprisingly simple. The concept of neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to physically reorganize itself based on experience, offers a solution to the emotional hijacking we've explored. With the right techniques, you can strengthen the connections between your emotional and rational brain regions. Most people assume their decision-making abilities are relatively fixed, that they're either good or bad at making rational choices under pressure. The science of neuroplasticity reveals this is incorrect. Your brain forms new neural pathways throughout your life, strengthening connections between regions that activate together and weakening those that don't. This allows you to rewire your brain's decision circuits with consistent practice. Many people never develop these improved pathways because they lack knowledge of specific techniques proven to create these changes. Generic approaches like think positive or just calm down are largely ineffective against the powerful 80 millisecond advantage your emotional brain enjoys. Success comes from understanding which practices specifically strengthen the connections between your prefrontal cortex, rational brain, and your limbic system, emotional brain. Neuroscience research identifies mindfulness meditation as particularly effective for strengthening the prefrontal cortex and improving emotional regulation. Mindfulness has been extensively studied using brain imaging technologies that show physical changes in brain structure and function. Even relatively short periods of consistent practice create measurable changes in the brain regions responsible for decision-making. A Harvard Medical School study used MRI scans to examine participants' brains before and after an 8-week mindfulness program. Researchers found significant increases in gray matter density in the prefrontal cortex, particularly in regions associated with attention, emotional regulation, and decision-making. They also observed decreased gray matter in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. These visible structural differences correlated directly with improved decision-making under pressure. Mindfulness specifically targets the connection between rational and emotional brain centers. Unlike traditional meditation that might focus on emptying the mind, mindfulness trains your attention to notice emotional reactions without immediately acting on them. This develops the crucial skill of observing emotions without being controlled by them. Think of your brain like a complex circuit board. Emotional reactions initially travel along the fastest, most direct pathways, bypassing rational thought centers. Mindfulness creates new neural connections through experience-dependent neuroplasticity, essentially installing new wiring that connects your emotional and rational systems. Over time, your rational brain communicates more effectively with your emotional centers, reducing the impact of the 80 millisecond advantage. Take Michael, a surgeon who struggled with making rushed decisions during complex procedures. After 8 weeks of daily mindfulness practice, he reported a remarkable change. During a particularly challenging surgery, I noticed a familiar feeling of panic rising, but instead of rushing my decision, I could observe the emotion without being overwhelmed by it. I maintained clarity and made a better technical choice than I would have previously. Research confirms Michael's experience. The University of Wisconsin Center for Healthy Minds found that just 8 weeks of regular mindfulness practice, 20 minutes daily, creates measurable changes in brain connectivity. Using functional MRI, researchers observed stronger neural connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala in meditation practitioners compared to control groups. These brain changes translate to improved real-world decision quality across various domains. Financial traders with mindfulness practices made significantly better investment decisions during market volatility. Healthcare professionals delivered more accurate diagnoses under time pressure. Military personnel demonstrated improved tactical decision-making in high-stress situations. These weren't subjective impressions, but measurable outcomes in environments where decision quality could be objectively assessed. The brain changes begin relatively quickly. While profound transformation requires longer practice, initial changes appear within just 2 weeks. A Yale University study found that even 10 days of consistent mindfulness practice produced measurable differences in prefrontal cortex activation during emotional challenges. The process works through Hebbian learning neurons that fire together, wire together. When practicing mindfulness, you systematically activate attention networks while experiencing emotional stimuli, strengthening connections between these regions and enabling better communication between rational and emotional brain centers. Studies confirm that mindfulness meditation physically strengthens connections between emotional and rational brain regions in as little as 8 weeks, visible on brain scans and measurable in decision outcomes. Your brain can be trained to integrate emotional and rational processing more effectively. This research represents a profound shift in understanding decision-making. Rather than seeing poor decisions as character flaws or knowledge gaps, we recognize them as products of brain systems that can be redesigned through specific practices. With consistent practice, you can create neural pathways that give your rational mind a fighting chance against emotional hijacking. Let's look at specific techniques scientifically proven to strengthen your rational thinking. Practical methods you can begin using immediately to rewire your brain's decision circuits and to overcome the 80 millisecond hijack that the most successful people in the world use these 3 science-backed techniques to prevent emotional hijacking, and most people have never heard of them. While countless books and articles suggest vague strategies like stay calm or think before you act, neuroscience has identified specific practices that physically change your brain's response to emotional triggers. These aren't theoretical ideas. They're concrete techniques with measurable effects on brain function and decision quality. Popular advice like just calm down or think positive rarely works during emotional hijacking because these approaches fail to address the fundamental timing problem we've discussed. Remember, your emotional brain has an 80-millisecond head start. By the time you realize you need to calm down, your amygdala has already activated stress responses throughout your body. Telling yourself to think positively after cortisol and adrenaline have flooded your system is like telling a car to stop after it's already crashed. Instead, research supports 3 techniques that work with your brain's architecture. 1. The pause practice. This technique involves waiting 90 seconds before responding to emotional triggers. Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor discovered that the physiological response to emotional stimuli takes approximately 90 seconds to move through your body. During this pause, brain activity shifts from emotional regions back to rational assessment areas. Consider how Navy SEALs use tactical breathing, taking slow, measured breaths before responding to high-stress situations. This physically interrupts the amygdala's control over breathing patterns, allowing the prefrontal cortex to regain influence. One SEAL commander reported that implementing this 90-second pause before critical decisions reduced mission errors by 32%. 2. Body scanning. This involves systematically noticing physical sensations associated with emotions as they arise. By training yourself to recognize tension in your shoulders, tightness in your chest, or changes in breathing, you can detect emotional responses before they fully hijack your thinking. Professional tennis player Maria recognized she was losing crucial points when pressured. Working with a performance coach, she learned to conduct quick body scans between points, identifying jaw tension as her earliest sign of anxiety. By recognizing this physical signal, she could address it before emotional thinking affected her performance. Her win rate in tie breaks improved dramatically after implementing this practice. 3. Cognitive reframing. This technique involves consciously relabeling threats as challenges. Stanford research found that simply changing how you label an emotional situation creates measurable differences in both brain activity and stress hormone levels. Emergency room doctors routinely practice this technique. Dr. James, an ER physician, trains residents to mentally reframe chaotic trauma situations from "this is overwhelming" to "this is an interesting challenge requiring my expertise." Hospital data showed that physicians using this reframing technique maintained steadier hands and made more accurate diagnoses during crises. These techniques work together as a comprehensive system. Body scanning helps you recognize when emotional responses are beginning. The pause creates space for your rational brain to activate. Reframing shifts your neural activity from threat response circuits to challenge response networks. Together, they address the timing disadvantage your rational brain faces. Each practice strengthens different neural pathways. Body scanning strengthens connections between bodily awareness regions and your prefrontal cortex. The pause practice reinforces neural circuits that inhibit impulsive responses. Cognitive reframing builds pathways between language centers and emotional regulation regions. With consistent practice, these techniques physically alter your brain's architecture. Regular use creates new neural pathways that bypass the amygdala's automatic responses. Unlike vague advice to stay calm, these specific practices target the actual mechanisms of emotional hijacking. The effectiveness comes from their complementary nature. When you feel your heart racing, body scan, you can pause for 90 seconds to let the initial surge subside. During that pause, you can consciously reframe the situation from threat to challenge. This sequence engages your prefrontal cortex before your amygdala can dominate decision-making. But how do you know when to use these techniques? Emotional hijacking often happens so quickly that we don't recognize it until after the damage is done. To use these tools effectively, you need to identify your personal patterns, the specific situations, physical sensations, and thought patterns that precede poor decisions in your life. Let's look at how to recognize when you're being emotionally hijacked so you can apply these techniques at the right moment. Recognizing your personal hijack patterns. Your emotional hijackings follow unique patterns, and once you see them, you'll never be fooled by your brain again. While we've discussed the general mechanics of how emotions override rational thought, each person experiences this hijacking in highly specific ways. Your brain has developed particular emotional triggers and response patterns based on your unique life history. Patterns so consistent, they're almost like fingerprints. Most people go their entire lives without recognizing these personal patterns. They experience the same emotional reactions in similar situations year after year, making the same poor decisions repeatedly without connecting the dots. Without awareness of your personal hijack patterns, you're essentially blindfolded in a neurological ambush that unfolds the same way each time. These patterns leave clear physical warning signs you can learn to recognize. Your body signals an impending emotional hijack well before your conscious mind notices anything wrong. Your heart rate might increase, your breathing pattern may shift, or specific muscles might tense. Each person's physical response signature is different. These physical changes happen during the 80 millisecond gap between your emotional brain's activation and your conscious awareness. Learning to identify these warning signs functions as an early detection system for emotional hijacking. Rather than realizing you've been emotionally hijacked after sending the angry email or making the impulsive purchase, you can catch the process in its earliest stages when intervention is still possible. What physical sensations precede your poor decisions? Do you feel tightness in your chest before workplace confrontations? Does your breathing become shallow before financial decisions you later regret? These physical signals remain remarkably consistent within individuals, but vary widely between people. Mark, a technology executive, discovered that before sending emails he later regretted, he always experienced a specific tension pattern in his jaw and shoulders. By recognizing this physical signature, he gained precious seconds to implement the pause technique before responding to triggering messages. What had been a career-limiting pattern of impulsive communication became manageable once he identified his personal warning signs. Creating a personal trigger inventory accelerates this recognition process. After making an emotionally driven decision, document the situation in detail. What was happening? What physical sensations did you experience? What emotion can you identify now? Over time, clear patterns emerge that help identify your unique emotional triggers. Research from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence found that emotional awareness, recognizing emotions as they arise rather than after they've influenced behavior, strongly predicts good decision-making across domains. Their studies show people with high emotional awareness make better financial decisions, have more successful relationships, and advance further in their careers. Many successful people maintain decision journals to track these patterns. Susan, a portfolio manager, documented every significant investment decision, the circumstances surrounding it, and her physical and emotional state. A pattern emerged. Her best decisions came when she felt calm physical sensations and moderate optimism, while her worst choices corresponded with either tension and fear or unusual energy and excessive excitement. This awareness allowed her to recognize poor states for decision-making and delay choices until her physiological state improved. Similar practices by figures like Ray Dalio and Bill Gates aren't merely psychological exercises. They're systematic approaches to identifying specific patterns of emotional hijacking that affect each individual. Their documented improvements in decision quality demonstrate how powerful this awareness can be. The most effective way to recognize when your emotions are taking control. Learn your physical warning signs, your inner warning light that precede poor decisions in your personal pattern. By catching these early signals, you gain valuable seconds to implement appropriate techniques. This recognition process becomes easier with practice. Neuroscience research shows that regularly directing attention to bodily sensations strengthens neural pathways between your interoceptive awareness, your internal body monitoring system, and your prefrontal cortex. Over time, this attention training creates automatic awareness. You'll notice your warning signs as naturally as feeling too hot or cold. What personal patterns might you be missing in your own decision-making? How might recognizing these patterns transform your responses to challenging situations? The process of identifying your patterns takes time, but creates lasting changes in how your brain processes emotional information. As you consistently recognize the early signs of emotional hijacking, you strengthen neural connections between your body awareness systems and your prefrontal cortex, creating what neuroscientists call top-down regulation, your conscious brain's ability to modulate emotional responses before they hijack your thinking. This comprehensive system for reprogramming how your brain responds to emotional triggers combines your understanding of brain function with recognition of personal patterns and consistent practice of evidence-based techniques. Together, these elements create lasting changes in how you make decisions under pressure. Putting it all together, your brain upgrade plan. What if you could upgrade your brain's operating system in just 21 days? Here's the exact plan that neuroscientists recommend. All the science we've covered offers a practical blueprint for rewiring your brain's decision circuits and overcoming the emotional hijacking that leads to poor choices. This approach focuses on systematic brain training based on how your neural pathways actually form and strengthen. The most effective way to implement what you've learned is through a structured 21-day brain upgrade program focusing on 3 core elements: morning mindfulness, daytime awareness checks, and evening reflection. This approach directly targets each aspect of emotional hijacking we've discussed, creating new neural pathways that empower your rational brain against emotional responses. Changing brain patterns requires consistency. The neural connections between your prefrontal cortex and limbic system strengthen gradually. Neuroscientists at University College London found that new behavioral patterns take approximately 18 to 254 days to become automatic, with 21 days being sufficient to create initial neural pathway changes visible on brain scans. Each practice session strengthens connections that were previously weak or non-existent. Morning routine, 10-minute mindfulness meditation. Purpose, strengthens neural connections between attention networks and emotional processing centers. Research base, Johns Hopkins University studies confirm this duration creates measurable brain changes while remaining sustainable. Implementation, focus on breathing. Notice when your mind wanders, gently return attention. Benefits, primes your brain for improved emotional regulation throughout the day. Evidence, the fMRI studies show even a single session creates temporary changes in emotional stimulus processing for hours afterward. Daytime practice, 30-second body scan check-ins. Purpose, develops interoceptive awareness to detect warning signs before emotional hijacking occurs. Trigger points, implement before starting work, important meetings, financial decisions, or difficult conversations. Technique, scan your body for tension patterns, notice breathing and muscle tightness. Research support. Carnegie Mellon University found multiple brief sessions create stronger neural pathways than fewer, longer sessions. Key factor, consistency rather than duration drives results. Evening practice, 5-minute decision reflection. Purpose, accelerates pattern recognition of your personal emotional triggers. Focus, identify successful prevention moments and instances where emotions influence choices. Approach, note physical sensations that preceded poor decisions in situations triggering emotional responses. Benefit, builds awareness of your unique hijacking patterns without judgment. Implementation strategy, progressive challenge levels. Week 1, apply techniques to low-stakes choices, responding to mildly annoying emails. Week 2, address moderate challenges, financial decisions, minor workplace conflicts. Week 3, tackle your most difficult emotional triggers, situations where you've historically been vulnerable. This progressive approach aligns with how your brain builds neural pathways. Research on skill acquisition confirms that gradually increasing challenge levels creates stronger neural connections and immediately attempting difficult applications. Each successful application in progressively challenging situations integrates your emotional and rational brain systems more effectively. These small daily practices lead to significant improvements in decision quality. An investment banker I worked with implemented this approach after emotional trading decisions cost his clients significantly. By program's end, colleagues noted marked improvement in his decision-making under pressure. 6 months later, his trading decisions improved by 34% during volatile market periods. Concrete evidence of neural change is translated into real-world outcomes. The system works holistically. Morning mindfulness strengthens your general capacity for emotional regulation. Daytime body scans help you recognize when hijacking begins. The pause practice gives your prefrontal cortex time to engage. Cognitive reframing changes how your brain processes emotional triggers. Evening reflection accelerates pattern recognition. Together they address every aspect of the emotional hijacking process. Brain imaging studies show participants following similar 21-day programs develop increased gray matter density in regions responsible for attention and emotional regulation, while showing decreased reactivity in the amygdala. This approach leverages your brain's natural neuroplasticity. You're not suppressing emotions or forcing rationality, but creating new neural pathways that integrate emotional and rational processing more effectively. Over time, these pathways become your brain's default response. Now you understand why you make bad decisions and exactly how to stop them. Your brain evolved for a world that no longer exists, but you're not stuck with outdated programming. Through these science-backed practices, you can update your brain's operating system to make decisions align with your actual goals, rather than primitive emotional responses. Your brain evolved for a world of immediate physical dangers, not emails and stock markets. The mismatch between your ancient neural wiring and modern challenges creates the bad decisions we've explored throughout this video. Each time you practice the techniques we've covered, the 90-second pause, body scanning, and cognitive reframing, you physically rewire your neural pathways. You're rebuilding your brain's architecture for today's world. Next time you feel that emotional surge before a decision, remember you hold the power to override ancient programming. Apply these tools consistently with our 21-day plan and watch as your decision-making transforms from reactive to intentional.